Millionaire CEO sees his ex-black wife on a flight with twins who look like him. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Alaric Vaughn sat in his soft chair, looking out of the window of his private jet. His hands gripped the armrest tightly. The sky outside was full of fluffy white clouds, but he felt uneasy. This trip was supposed to be simple, just a business meeting. But something inside him told him that trouble was coming. He took a deep breath and shifted in his seat, trying to calm himself. He thought maybe he was just nervous about the big business deal. If it didn't go well, his company and reputation could suffer. His biggest rival, Magnus Thornfield, was waiting for the perfect moment to take his place. But even though Alaric knew all of this, something felt different. It wasn't just about business. Something bigger was coming. His assistant, Cassian, sat nearby, flipping through some papers. Cassian looked up and asked, "Sir, are you okay?" His voice was quiet and full of concern. Alaric rubbed his forehead and said, "Just a headache." But he knew Cassian wasn't fooled. The feeling in Alaric's chest wasn't like normal business stress. It was sharper, deeper. To distract himself, Alaric looked around the plane. The company employees sat in neat rows, busy with their work. Flight attendants checked the bags overhead. 2 security guards stood near the door, watching everything closely. Everything looked normal. But then someone new walked in. A woman stepped onto the plane, holding the hands of 2 small children. Alaric's breath caught in his throat. Sarah! She moved with the same quiet grace that he remembered. Her shoulders were straight, her head held high, but her face looked tired. Beside her stood 2 golden-haired twins. They looked exactly alike, except for a tiny freckle on the boy's cheek. The children's bright eyes darted around, amazed by the fancy plane. Alaric's heart pounded. He sank deeper into his seat, wishing he could disappear. He had never seen these twins before. Yet something about their faces, the way their hair shined, looked just like him when he was little. A memory flashed in his mind, a photo of himself as a child. Cassian followed his gaze and saw Sarah. He gave Alaric a small nod, then quickly looked back at his papers, pretending not to notice anything. No one ever talked about Alaric's ex-wife. She had been gone for years. Alaric forced himself to stay calm. He was the boss. He had to look strong. He couldn't let his emotions show in front of his employees, his guards, or even the flight attendants. But as Sarah and the twins walked past him, every muscle in Alaric's body tensed. The children paused and looked at him. One of them gave him a small, shy smile, like they somehow knew him. Then they walked on. Sarah's eyes met Alaric's for just a second. Then she turned away, guiding the children to their seats. Alaric squeezed his eyes shut. He remembered the last time he saw Sarah. It had been a cold, tense morning. He had been focused on work, and she had wanted a normal life. They had pulled apart, and neither of them had tried to fix it. And now, she was here, with twins who looked just like him. Cassian leaned in and whispered, "Do you want me to move her to another plane?" Alaric swallowed hard. "No, it's fine. We can't make a scene." He wasn't sure who he was trying to protect, his business image or the innocence of the 2 children. The plane took off, soaring into the sky. Alaric tried to focus on the view outside, but his mind was racing with questions. How? Why? What was Sarah doing here? Were the twins really his? About an hour into the flight, a beep sounded. The pilot's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're expecting some turbulence." Alaric clicked his belt in place. Then he noticed movement near the front of the plane. A man with a camera stood up. Alaric's pulse quickened. Was this a reporter or worse? Suddenly, the man rushed down the aisle, snapping photos of Alaric. Then, to Alaric's horror, he turned the camera towards Sarah and the twins. "Hey, Mr. Vaughn, is this your secret family? Care to comment on these kids?" the man shouted. Alaric clenched his jaw and stood up. Cassian tried to stop him, but he brushed him off. "Who let you on this plane?" he demanded. The man ignored him and kept taking pictures. Sarah stood halfway, shielding the children. Fear and anger flashed in her eyes. One of the twins grabbed her hand tightly, confused and scared. Alaric's security guards lunged at the man, grabbing him before he could take more photos. The plane shook as turbulence hit, making the overhead lights flicker. People gasped. The fight between the guards and the intruder got rough, too close to the emergency exit door. Alaric grabbed onto a seat, steadying himself. He had faced business attacks before, but never this kind of chaos. Sarah turned away from the fight, hugging the twins. Their small faces were buried in her jacket. Seeing them so scared sent a strange, protective feeling through Alaric. He wasn't used to feeling like this. At last, the guards pinned the man down and took away his camera. One of them checked for hidden devices. Alaric wiped sweat from his forehead as the plane shook again. Cassian stepped forward. "I'll tell the pilot. When we land, we'll hand him over to the police." Alaric nodded, relieved, but his eyes stayed on Sarah and the twins. What if they had gotten hurt? He didn't even know them, yet the thought made his chest ache. The pilot spoke again over the speakers. "We apologize for the disturbance. We will be landing in a couple of hours. Please remain seated." Alaric glanced at Sarah. She gave him a small nod, as if saying this wasn't over. He knew she was right. There were too many unanswered questions. Why was she on his plane? Were the twins his children? He took a deep breath and walked toward Sarah's seat. He knelt slightly so he wouldn't look too big to the twins. In a quiet voice, he said, "We need to talk." She met his eyes, sadness in hers. "Yes, we do." His heart pounded as he stepped back. This conversation couldn't wait any longer. Later, in the small lounge at the back of the jet, Sarah stood by the window, arms crossed. Alaric hesitated in the doorway. He didn't know how to start. "Sarah," he said. She turned, her face serious. "Let's just get this over with." He nodded. "I'm sorry for what happened earlier." "That man." "It's not your fault," she said, "but we have more important things to talk about." Alaric swallowed. "The twins, are they?" She took a deep breath. "Their names are Ryan and Elowin. They turned 5 last month." 5 years. Alaric's heart pounded. 5 birthdays. 5 years of bedtime stories. 5 years of first steps, moments he had missed. "Do they know about me?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not really. I told them I was married once, but I never told them more." Alaric felt the weight of her words. Everything was about to change, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what to do next. Alaric sat down in a small seat, his shoulders low. His voice was tired as he asked, "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah's eyes shone with anger. "You left our life, Alaric. I thought it was best for us to move on. I never thought you would be part of their world, so I kept it a secret. Right or wrong, it was my choice." Alaric's heart ached. Memories came rushing back, the big dreams that pulled him away, the arguments, the missed phone calls. He remembered the last time they had spoken. She was upset, and he was too busy with work. Now the regret felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. Before he could say more, there was a knock at the door. Cassian walked in, looking nervous. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I think you both should see this." He held out a tablet. On the screen was a news article with a big picture of Alaric. The headline said, "CEO Alaric Vaughn hiding secret family?" Sarah's face turned pale. "Already?" she whispered. "That fast?" Alaric grabbed the tablet and read the article. It was full of words like "sources say," "rumors," and "not confirmed." But it still made him look bad, as if he had abandoned his family and kept them a secret. His jaw tightened. "This is Magnus's doing. It has to be." Cassian nodded. "It could be, and there's more. The company's legal team just called. The board wants us to fix this quickly. The company's stock price is already dropping." Sarah crossed her arms, her voice shaking with anger. "Do they not care that there are real children involved? This isn't just a story for the news." Alaric put the tablet down. "In the business world, people love a big story more than the truth. Magnus knows that, and he's using it against me." He looked at Sarah. I promise I'll keep Ryan and Elowen safe from this. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Will you? Your security team couldn't even stop that photographer from getting on this plane. When we land, there will be a crowd waiting for us. How exactly do you plan on keeping them safe? Alaric shut his eyes and took a deep breath. He hated feeling powerless. We'll figure something out, he said, rubbing his forehead. I know people. We'll get them through the airport quietly, away from the cameras. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded. All right, but I'll hold you to that. Cassian cleared his throat. Alaric, they need you at the front. The press is calling, and your PR team is struggling. Alaric ran a hand through his hair and stood up. I'll handle it. Then he turned to Sarah. This conversation isn't over. She let out a short, bitter laugh. You think? Alaric walked away toward the front of the plane to deal with the press. The air around them felt heavy. His mind flashed back to the look on his children's faces when the photographer had appeared. Sarah had pulled them close, shielding them. Despite all his power and money, he had been completely helpless in that moment. It stung. A few minutes later, Alaric was on the phone with his company's lawyers. Sarah stayed in the lounge, trying to calm her racing thoughts. In the seats nearby, she heard Rion asking questions about clouds, while Elowen hummed a song. She forced a cheerful voice and told them everything was fine, even though inside she was filled with worry. She had thought she was doing the right thing by raising the twins away from Alaric's busy life. But now, everything was out in the open. Had she made the right choice, or had she just made things worse? The plane shook slightly as the pilot announced they were landing. Alaric came back, looking more serious than ever. There's no way to avoid this, he said quietly. Reporters are waiting at the airport. They won't leave until they get an answer. Sarah pressed her lips together. Then I guess I'll have to trust you to handle it, she said. Then, more softly, she added, for their sake. Alaric stood up straight. We'll do everything we can to keep them out of sight. Cassian and security will take us through a private exit. The twins were excited as they watched the airport through the windows. Alaric stood behind them, gripping the seats, his stomach twisted with fear, guilt, and the need to protect them. When the planes stopped and the doors opened, Cassian signaled for them to wait while other passengers left. The tension was thick in the air. Alaric's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from an unknown number read, "They know about your secret family. Expect more trouble." A cold feeling ran down his spine. He showed Sarah the screen. She turned pale. "Who sent that?" she whispered, looking around nervously. "I don't know," Alaric said, "but it means someone is pulling the strings to make this worse. Someone who knows too much." Sarah swallowed hard. The twins looked up, sensing the adults were scared. Alaric's throat tightened, but he kept himself steady. He gently took Sarah's arm and led her and the children toward the door. Outside, flashes of cameras lit up like fireworks. The moment they stepped off the plane, reporters shouted questions at them. "Mr. Vaughn, is it true you hid your family for years?" "Sarah, did Alaric abandon you and the twins?" "Are these children really yours, Mr. Vaughn?" Alaric's chest tightened. He held Ryan's hand gently, trying to keep him calm. The little boy looked around with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the noise. Cassian led them quickly through the airport, security forming a wall around them. A reporter pushed a microphone too close to Ryan, making him flinch. Alaric picked him up, holding him close. After what felt like forever, they reached a secured door. They stepped outside to where two black cars were waiting. The security team held the reporters back while they hurried inside. Sarah sat in the back seat with Elowen on her lap. Alaric got in next to them, still holding Ryan. Cassian sat in the front, nodding to the driver. The car sped away, leaving the chaos behind. Sarah let out a shaky breath. "This is too much," she murmured. "It's like we're animals in a zoo." Ryan looked up at Alaric, as if searching for reassurance. Alaric gently ran his hand over the boy's hair. "I know, I'm sorry." "Sir, The board wants an emergency meeting. They might want you to speak at a press conference. A press conference? Sarah asked, shocked. Haven't we had enough publicity for one day? Alaric sighed, loosening his tie. The board thinks I need to talk to the public or the company will suffer. She scoffed. What are you going to say? Surprise! I just found out I have kids? How does that protect them? Alaric shook his head. I don't have all the answers yet, but this is my mess, and I won't let them suffer because of it. A little while later, they arrived at Alaric's office building. He led Sarah and the kids to a private room. Stay here, he told Sarah. I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. After that, we'll find a safe place for you and the kids. She nodded. Don't take too long. I'm scared, Alaric. People are digging into our lives. Cassian ran up to Alaric holding a folder. Sir, I found something important, he said. These papers show that Magnus Thornfield has been sending stories to certain newspapers. We don't have proof yet that he planned the attack at the airport, but it looks suspicious. Alaric looked at the papers, and his stomach felt tight with anger. It seemed like Magnus was controlling everything. So he's the one pulling the strings, Alaric muttered. We need to do something fast. Cassian looked worried. The press conference might be exactly what Magnus wants. Are you sure about this? He asked. Alaric nodded. If we keep hiding from the news, we look guilty. If we say nothing, Magnus keeps spreading lies. It's better to face it now. When Alaric went back to Sarah and the kids, they were sitting at a small table. Elowen was coloring and Ryan was looking at a book about airplanes and cities. Sarah stood up quickly. What did they say? She asked. I have to hold a press conference. Alaric said softly, I'll tell the truth and stop the lies. I'll keep the kids out of it. Sarah looked at him with worry. And what if people still keep talking? She asked. Alaric saw Ryan looking at him with big eyes and Elowen watching her mother's face. He sighed. I can't promise this will fix everything, but it might stop things from getting worse. Sarah agreed to stay in a nearby office with the kids while Alaric spoke. She gave him a small nod. Be careful, she said, and Alaric could tell she still cared about him, even though she was upset. Alaric took a deep breath, put on a nice suit, and walked into the press room. The room was full of cameras and reporters talking quietly. As he walked to the podium, the room went silent. He cleared his throat. Good afternoon. My name is Alaric Vaughn. I want to talk about the stories being spread about me. The reporters listened closely as Alaric explained the truth. He admitted he had made mistakes, but said families, especially children, should not be attacked by the news. Behind him, the board members stood quietly, showing they were still supporting him. Suddenly, a reporter jumped up and held some papers. Mr. Vaughn, is this your marriage certificate with Sarah? And what about these pictures from 5 years ago? It looks like you lied about being single while building your career. How do you explain this? People gasped, and the room filled with whispers. Alaric felt his stomach drop. He had tried to keep his secret marriage hidden, but now the truth was out. Cameras flashed and reporters started shouting. Then the side door opened. Sarah had come in, drawn by the noise. The kids were out of sight, but her face alone made the crowd even more excited. The board members behind Alaric looked nervous, and Sarah stood still under the bright lights, looking scared. Alaric held the microphone tightly, trying to think. The room was loud, and the reporters wouldn't stop yelling questions. He looked at Sarah. She looked afraid. He thought about Ryan and Elowen waiting nearby, probably scared too. He took a deep breath. Yes, he said, his voice rough. I was married to Sarah, and yes, the children might be mine. The room went completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop clicking. Alaric could only hope that telling the truth would help. Then the shouting started again. Reporters asked more and more questions. Alaric's security team moved quickly, leading him away from the podium. Sarah stood frozen, looking like she wanted to disappear. Finally, she followed Alaric, ignoring the flashing cameras and loud voices. Behind the stage, in a quiet hallway, Cassian and Vesper Lane were waiting with the twins. Ryan and Elowen were holding each other, looking scared. Sarah picked up Elowen and held her close. "Let's get out of here," Alaric said, taking Ryan's hand. They walked down a hallway to an elevator guarded by security. The ride up was silent. When they reached Alaric's office, they hurried inside. The big room felt strange now, filled with worry. Sarah sat on a couch, still holding Elowen. Ryan stayed close to Alaric. Vesper Lane patted Sarah's shoulder gently. Alaric took a deep breath. He had tried to keep his family out of the news, but now they were stuck in the middle of everything. Just then, a board member rushed in, looking upset. "This is bad," he said. "The company's stock price is falling. Investors are angry. They think your personal problems make the company unstable." Alaric straightened up. "I understand," he said. "I never meant for this to happen, but I won't let the company fall apart because of my personal life." The man glanced at Sarah and the twins, then left without another word. The room was silent for a moment. Sarah pressed a hand to her forehead. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I never wanted the kids to be in the news like this." Alaric knelt beside her. "I know," he said. "I'm so sorry." Before Sarah could answer, Cassian looked at his phone. "Magnus Thornfield just made a public statement," he said. "He's saying you can't handle the company. He wants the board to replace you." Alaric clenched his fists. Magnus had always been his biggest rival, waiting for a moment like this. Sarah frowned. "Is this just about your company? What about the kids? They can't keep being followed by reporters." Alaric looked at Ryan and Elowen. They looked nervous. He remembered all the times he had missed being with them, too focused on work. "We'll protect them," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. Sarah gave him a sharp look. "How? They're already caught in this mess." Vesper Lane touched Sarah's shoulder. "Let him try," she said. "You can't do this alone." Alaric's phone buzzed again. More bad news about the company, more lies from Magnus. By evening, Alaric locked himself in his office, looking through documents. Sarah stayed close to the twins. The whole building felt quiet, like it knew something was wrong. Late at night, Alaric found something shocking. Magnus had been secretly meeting with some of Alaric's board members, planning to take the company from him. The proof was clear. Alaric's heart pounded. Just then, the security alarm beeped. "Mr. Vaughn," a guard's voice said, "we see someone moving in the lower floor." Alaric rushed to the elevator. When he reached the hallway, he heard footsteps and a noise around the corner. He ran and saw a person in dark clothes searching through his files. "Stop!" a guard shouted. The person tried to run but was tackled by security. Papers flew everywhere. A guard pulled a flash drive from the intruder's hand. "He was trying to steal files from your computer," the guard said. Sarah and the kids appeared at the hallway's entrance. "What's going on?" she asked. Alaric quickly told her to leave with the kids. She gave a small nod and left. Alaric turned to the intruder. Security removed his mask, revealing someone from a PR firm linked to Magnus. Alaric tightened his jaw. "Take him to a secure room," he ordered. "Call the police." Holding the flash drive, Alaric went back to his office. He plugged it into a laptop. What he saw made his blood go cold. Emails, documents, even pictures of the twins. Magnus had planned everything, and he wasn't working alone. Many powerful people were helping him destroy Alaric's life. Alaric closed his laptop quickly. He didn't want her to see more of the bad things Magnus was saying about him. "Yeah," Alaric said, "he's trying to ruin me. He has proof, rumors, and lies. He wants everyone to think I'm not good enough to run my company or be a father." Sarah looked away, her face sad. "He hated you," she whispered. "I never knew how much. When Magnus and I were just friends, he would say little things about you, making me think you didn't care about me. I thought he was just looking out for me or maybe a little jealous, but now—" She stopped, guilt in her eyes. "Maybe I made it worse by telling him how you were always busy, how we never had time together." Alaric placed his hand on the table. A heavy silence filled the room. None of this is your fault, he said firmly. Magnus is the one making this worse. He's using my personal life to hurt me. Sarah still looked unsure, but she took a deep breath. I just don't want the twins to get dragged into this. Cassian's phone made a sound. He looked at the screen, his face turning serious. We just got invited to a big fancy party tomorrow night. It's hosted by one of your biggest investors. And guess what? Magnus will be there. Alaric glanced at his laptop. A public event, he muttered. He'll try to embarrass me in front of everyone, but if I don't go, people will think I'm hiding. Sarah frowned. Are you really going to face him with all those cameras watching? Alaric nodded. I have no choice. If I don't show up, he'll say I'm scared. The tension in the room stayed even as they got ready for bed. Alaric made sure Sarah and the twins had a safe place to stay. Security was doubled because of the recent break-in. Outside, the storm was getting stronger, but Alaric would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The next morning, Sarah found Alaric already getting ready for the party. He was pacing around, talking on the phone, making sure nothing could go wrong. When he hung up, Sarah walked up to him. I'm coming with you. Alaric looked surprised. I don't know if that's a good idea, he said. Magnus might use you being there to cause more trouble. Sarah shook her head. Let him try. I won't hide anymore. He thinks he can use my past or our kids to hurt you, but he's wrong. Alaric looked at her, something like gratitude in his eyes. All right, he said, though he still looked worried. Just stay away from Magnus unless you have to talk to him. That evening, they arrived at a fancy hotel ballroom. A huge chandelier shined above them, making the floor sparkle. Alaric wore a black suit, and Sarah wore a simple but beautiful dress that made people turn to look at her. Cassian followed closely, watching for trouble. Rich business people filled the room, sipping drinks and talking about money. But underneath, they were whispering about Alaric's scandal. Alaric smiled, shook hands, and acted calm. Sarah stayed by his side, standing tall. Then Magnus appeared. He was wearing a perfect suit, looking full of confidence. He saw Alaric and smirked, raising his glass in a fake toast. Alaric's heart pounded, but he only gave Magnus a short nod and kept walking. The tension in the room grew. Magnus talked to different investors, glancing at Alaric from time to time. People whispered behind their hands, and when Sarah walked by, someone said, "Is that her? The ex-wife with the twins?" She swallowed hard but kept walking. Finally, the host tapped a microphone. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Let's focus on our future and the success of our business. If anyone has concerns, feel free to share. Magnus stepped forward smoothly. Why, thank you, he said, taking the microphone. Everyone turned to look at him. Alaric's jaw tightened. Magnus smiled, slow and dramatic. These are uncertain times, he said. Some of us have even been asked by reporters about certain scandals. I think, in the spirit of honesty, we should ask ourselves, do these scandals affect our company's future? Alaric stepped closer, his fists clenched. If you have something to say, Magnus, say it. Magnus smirked. Oh, I will. His eyes flicked to Sarah. Alaric's personal problems aren't just rumors anymore, are they? He placed the microphone down, then leaned toward Alaric. You've seen the headlines. Your company's stock is dropping. People are questioning your decisions. And all because you kept certain secrets. Sarah's hands balled into fists. This isn't about secrets, she snapped. You're using me and my children to attack Alaric. Magnus raised an eyebrow. Your past, he said with fake innocence. I remember when you used to tell me how lonely you felt with Alaric, how he was never home. Did he tell you he planned to keep me off the board once he got more power? So many little things that add up, don't they? Alaric stepped in front of Sarah. Leave her out of this. Magnus's face hardened, but he kept his fake charm. Don't worry. I'll focus on what matters. Your company. Unless, of course, you want to step down. If you do, maybe I'll stop talking to the press. People around them leaned in, cameras flashing. Alaric felt the weight of everyone's eyes. Magnus smirked. So, What will it be? Will you lose your company, or will you protect your family? Sarah's hand gripped Alaric's arm. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Magnus whispered one last threat before stepping away. Alaric barely remembered the rest of the night. Later, they arrived at a secure house. Guards stood outside with serious faces. Sarah carried Elowin, who was asleep, while Ryan held Alaric's hand, blinking sleepily. Inside, the house was big and quiet. It didn't feel like home, but at least it was safe. Cassian walked in, holding papers and talking on the phone. "Security is tight," he said. "No one gets in or out without permission." Sarah nodded. "Thank you." Cassian showed them to their rooms. Alaric tucked Ryan into bed. "Where are we?" the boy mumbled sleepily. "Just a safe place," Alaric whispered. "Go to sleep." Ryan nodded and closed his eyes. Alaric smoothed the boy's hair, his heart aching. He had missed so many bedtime moments. In the next room, Sarah tucked Elowin in, whispering softly. When she came out, she met Alaric in the hallway. "We need to talk." They sat in the sitting room. Sarah hugged herself. "I can't believe we're hiding," she said. "And Magnus is still out there." Alaric sighed. "I know. If we keep reacting to him, we'll never stop him." She looked at him, her eyes determined. "I used to trust him. I told him things when I felt alone. Now he's twisting my words to hurt you." Alaric placed his hand on the couch. "We both made mistakes," he admitted, "but now he's using our past against us. I won't let him hurt you again." A knock at the door interrupted them. A guard peeked in. "Sir, do you want to check the security footage?" Alaric shook his head. "I'll look in the morning. Just stay alert." After the guard left, Sarah walked to the balcony. "What if we can't stop him?" Alaric stood beside her. "We will," he promised, and when he reached for her hand, she let him. Alaric looked at Sarah and said firmly, "We will protect them. You are not alone in this anymore." They were both so tired, so Sarah went to her room and Alaric went to another. The house was beautiful, but they did not sleep well. Every little noise in the hallway made Alaric nervous. Every rustling leaf outside made Sarah's heart beat fast. By morning, neither of them felt rested. As the sun came up, they all gathered for breakfast in the sitting room. The twins, Rion and Elowin, were wide awake and curious about their new home. Elowin stared at the big windows in amazement while Rion played with his scrambled eggs, not really interested in eating. "Can we go outside?" Ryan asked, looking at both Sarah and Alaric. Sarah tried to smile. "Not right now," she said gently. "Maybe later if it's safe. For now, we have to stay inside." The twins looked disappointed. Alaric felt sad seeing their little faces, so he gave them his phone to play a game. The twins laughed while watching funny cartoons, and for a little while they forgot about being stuck inside. Just then, Cassian came into the room holding some papers. He whispered to Alaric about someone on the board of his company who might be helping Magnus, the man trying to hurt them. Sarah overheard bits of their talk, words like stealing money, secret calls, and hush money. It felt like something out of a mystery book, except this was real. Hours passed with Alaric and Cassian making phone calls and planning. Security guards walked through the hallways, checking cameras and making sure no one was sneaking in. The children got bored. Sarah tried reading them a story, but she kept looking at the windows, feeling like someone was watching them. By the afternoon, loud voices echoed through the house. Security guards rushed toward the hallway. Sarah stood up fast, her heart pounding. Alaric ran to the guards. "What happened?" he asked. One guard, breathing hard, said, "False alarm, sir. A motion detector went off near the side door, but it was just a gardener who forgot to check in." Even though it was a mistake, everyone still felt uneasy. Sarah looked at the twins, like Elowin hugged her leg and Ryan peeked out from behind her. Alaric felt anger toward Magnus. His children shouldn't have to live in fear. That night, after the twins were asleep, Sarah walked up and down the hallway, feeling restless. Alaric followed her. "I can't live like this," she whispered. "Locked away, afraid of every shadow, but I don't see a way out." Alaric touched her arm gently. You're right. We can't stay on the defensive forever. We need a plan. Once we find out who is helping Magnus, we can stop him. Sarah glanced at the twins' bedroom door. I used to think your world was just business meetings and big deals. Now I see it's more like a war. I wish I had known before. Alaric sighed. I'm sorry, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Just as they were about to go to their rooms, Sarah noticed a white envelope on the floor near the door. She picked it up. There was no name, no address. With shaking hands, she opened it and read the words inside. End this, or your children will pay. She gasped. Alaric read over her shoulder, his hands trembling. Someone had gotten past security and left this message. Sarah hugged herself, fear in her eyes. Alaric called the guards, ordering them to check the whole house again. Alaric and Sarah went to the sitting room where Cassian and Vesper Lane were waiting. Sarah held up the note. We're trapped in here. First, the cameras on the plane, now this. They're coming after the children, Alaric. Alaric nodded. They want me to leave the company. If I quit, maybe they'll stop, but there's no guarantee. Magnus has already shown how far he's willing to go. Cassian placed a folder on the table. I looked into our board members. One name keeps showing up in secret emails, Dorian. It looks like he's been getting money from a company linked to Magnus. Alaric's eyes darkened. Dorian has been part of the board since the beginning. He's always been polite, never causing trouble. Maybe that's why no one suspected him. Sarah paced back and forth. What do we do? Confront him? Alaric shook his head. If he's guilty, he'll just lie. We need proof before we make a move. Vesper Lane thought for a moment. What if we call a big meeting, a formal gathering where everyone has to show up? If Dorian is guilty, he'll panic. Alaric nodded. A shareholder meeting. We'll say it's about recent problems in the company. If Dorian is working with Magnus, he'll show his fear when we reveal evidence. Sarah frowned. What about the children? I don't want them anywhere near danger. Alaric sighed. Nowhere seems safe, but I'll keep extra security with them. If we do this right, we can finally end this. That night, Alaric and Cassian stayed up late, going through documents, making sure they had proof. Alaric kept glancing down the hall where his children slept, knowing time was running out. The next day, the big meeting was held in a large conference hall. The room was full of important people. Magnus was there too, standing at the back with a smug smile. Sarah and the twins stayed in a private room nearby, guarded by Vesper Lane and security. Alaric stood at the podium. Thank you for coming, he began. Some people have spread rumors to hurt my name. Today, I will clear things up. The big screens lit up with secret emails and bank records. Alaric looked straight at Dorian. I have proof that Dorian Hale leaked information to an enemy. Dorian's face turned pale. This is a lie, he shouted. Alaric challenged him. Then let's have an independent team check the records. Dorian looked toward Magnus, who gave him a small nod, like he was telling him to stay quiet. Just then, people in the crowd started shouting. Protesters were yelling, Alaric Vaughn is a fraud. Security tried to stop them, but in the confusion, two men slipped backstage. Sarah, hearing the noise, peeked out. She saw Magnus's smug face and knew something bad was happening. Suddenly, one man grabbed Elowin and tried to run. No, Sarah screamed, pulling Ryan close. Vesper Lane fought another man, but he was strong. Alaric heard the scream and ran backstage. He saw one man dragging Elowin away. Without thinking, Alaric jumped at him, knocking him to the ground. Elowin was freed. Security tackled the kidnappers and took them away. Sarah held her children, crying. Elowin and Ryan clung to their parents. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. The business meeting was forgotten. People were talking about how Alaric had protected his kids. As Alaric and Sarah hurried the children into a special elevator, no one spoke. But everyone was thinking the same thing. How much more trouble could the company take? They reached Alaric's big office, but it didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a hiding place. Cassian turned on the news to see if people were already talking about what happened. Sure enough, the news headline read, CEO Alaric Vaughn protects children from intruders. Company in trouble? Sarah's shoulders sank. She looked very tired, and new worry lines showed on her face. She gently guided the twins to a couch and asked them to rest. Alaric's phone started ringing again and again. Board members were calling and sending emails, all demanding an explanation. When he finally answered, many voices spoke at once. We can't keep going like this, Alaric. This is bad for the company. Your personal problems are hurting all of us. Alaric closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying not to yell. The board always talked about caring, but all they really cared about was money. You saw what happened, Alaric said, keeping his voice calm. This wasn't my fault. My family was attacked. What was I supposed to do? Just let it happen? There was a long silence. Then an older voice finally spoke. We understand, Alaric, but until things settle down, the board has decided that you can't run the company for now. Alaric's stomach dropped. He glanced at Sarah, who was tucking Eloin into a blanket on the couch. So you're pushing me out? He asked. It's just temporary, the board member said, until this scandal dies down. Alaric almost laughed at the way they tried to make it sound nice, but he knew the truth. They were taking away his power. He hung up the phone, his hands feeling numb. Sarah saw his face and stood up. She looked at his phone, then back at him. You're out? She asked softly. Alaric nodded, and Sarah's face turned pale. Alaric, I'm so sorry. This is happening because of me and the kids. Alaric put the phone down. No, it's because of Magnus. He planned all of this. But yes, the board thinks my personal life is a problem. Sarah tucked her hair behind her ear, guilt in her eyes. Maybe we should leave. The twins and I could go somewhere safe. Maybe that would help. Alaric felt anger rise inside him, but not at her. No, you're not the problem, he said firmly. Leaving won't fix this. Magnus will just win and keep spreading lies. Sarah's voice shook, but the children, every time they're around, something bad happens. I don't want them in danger. Alaric stepped closer and lowered his voice. I know, but if you run, you won't be safe. Magnus doesn't care about rules. If you leave, you'll be unprotected. Sarah swallowed hard, fear in her eyes, but finally she nodded. Tears shimmered, but she didn't let them fall. I don't know how much more we can take, she whispered. Before Alaric could answer, the door suddenly swung open. Magnus Thornfield walked in, followed by two of Alaric's own security guards. Alaric stiffened and stepped in front of Sarah to protect her. What is he doing here? He demanded. One of the guards looked guilty. He said it was important. We couldn't stop him. He's a major shareholder. Magnus smoothed his jacket and gave a fake little bow. I heard about what happened at the auditorium. Thought I'd visit. His voice was full of fake kindness. Then he looked at Sarah and smirked. And I see you're playing house with your little family here in the office. Sarah's face hardened. You have no right to be here, Magnus. Magnus shrugged. Oh, but I do. I own a big part of the company now, thanks to your stock dropping. I came to see if Alaric is finally ready to step down for good. Alaric's fists clenched. I will never give you this company. I know exactly what you've done. Magnus's eyes gleamed. I'm just giving you a way out, Alaric. The board is already pushing you aside. If you leave now, you can save some dignity, maybe even keep some shares. Then he looked at Sarah. And your ex-wife, or is she your new wife now? Sarah didn't say anything, refusing to let him get to her. Magnus smirked. Well, if you keep fighting, I can't promise your kids won't end up all over the news. People love a story about an absentee father suddenly playing hero. Who knows what secrets they'll find? Alaric stepped forward, fury in his eyes, but the guards stopped him. Magnus sighed and shook his head. You're only making things worse for yourself, he said, then walked out. As soon as he was gone, Sarah collapsed into a chair, shaking. Alaric placed a hand on her shoulder, anger and worry filling him. Magnus was more dangerous than ever. If Alaric didn't do something, the next attack could be even worse. He looked at his sleeping children. A painful decision formed in his mind. "That's it," he said. "No more playing nice. I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect them." Cassian and Vesper Lane came back into the room. Cassian looked frustrated. "We can still fight him. We have enough proof to take him to court. It might make him back off." Alaric nodded. "Let's get a restraining order, anything to slow him down." Sarah looked up. "I don't want the twins dragged through this, but we have no choice, do we?" Alaric knelt beside her. "No, but we'll do this the right way. If we expose Magnus, maybe the board will let me take back control. If not, at least I won't let him bully us." She studied his face. "And if he still doesn't stop?" Alaric's eyes hardened. "Then we find another way." That night, Sarah decided not to leave. She realized they were safer together. They had to fight back. Near dawn, Alaric and Sarah sat in his office, exhausted but working on their legal plan. The building was silent. Then Sarah's phone rang. She answered quickly, trying not to wake the twins. A friend whispered on the other end, telling her something shocking. Sarah's face turned pale. She hung up, her hands shaking. Alaric frowned. "What is it?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Magnus just challenged you to a public showdown. He wants you to either give up your rights to the company or face total ruin." Alaric barely slept after that. The next morning, he and Cassian prepared for the big showdown. The event was set at a fancy resort by the ocean. The press, investors, and board members all came to watch. When the event started, Alaric spoke first. He told the truth about Magnus's lies. Then Magnus smirked and tried to make Alaric look bad. But then a woman in the crowd stood up. She was a board member named Isolde. "Actually, Magnus," she said, holding up papers, "I have proof that you've been lying this whole time." Alaric nodded to Isolde to say thank you, then kept talking. "With or without Magnus helping, we have already started a separate investigation. If we find proof of crimes, we will press charges." The big room went quiet. It felt like people were now on Alaric's side. But Alaric stayed careful. He knew Magnus would not give up easily. Upstairs, Sarah watched everything happen on a live video screen. She rested her hand on Ryan's shoulder. Her heart beat fast as she listened. Elowen held a small stuffed toy, looking at the screen and then at her mother's worried face. Vesper Lane stood by the door, arms crossed, ready for trouble. Back in the ballroom, Magnus spoke loudly to the crowd. "This is all fake. Alaric Vaughn is scared. He will do anything to keep his position. He is twisting the truth to trick you. He ignored his family just to get power, and now he is paying for it." People looked from Magnus to Alaric, waiting to see who would win. Alaric took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "I made mistakes, but I admit them. You, Magnus, used my personal life to attack me. You crossed every line, and you hurt innocent people." Magnus's face turned red with anger. He was about to say something when a lawyer who was reading Isolde's papers cleared his throat. "These records are real," he said. "They show Magnus sending money to certain board members. There are also emails proving he told them to leak private information about Alaric." The crowd gasped. Magnus's body stiffened. "This is a lie," he shouted. "I will fight any charges." But his voice shook, and people noticed. Alaric stepped forward. "No more lies. We have all the proof. The only question is, will you admit what you did, or will I have to show everything in court?" Magnus's face changed for a moment. He looked unsure, but then he stood tall again. "Expose whatever you want," he hissed. "The board has already turned against you. When this is over, you will lose everything." Suddenly, a group of police officers entered the ballroom. They were with Cassian. One officer walked up to Magnus. "Sir, we have a warrant for your arrest. You are suspected of conspiracy, fraud, and harassment." The whole room went silent. Magnus's eyes widened in shock. Then his face turned cold and angry. Reporters jumped up, taking pictures as the officers grabbed Magnus's arms. He tried to pull away, but two more officers stopped him. As they led him away, Magnus leaned toward Alaric and whispered angrily, "You think this is over? You haven't beaten the real villains yet. I'm just a small piece of a bigger plan." Alaric stared at him. "We'll see," he said. Magnus glanced at the cameras, then back at Alaric. "You will regret this," he hissed. Then the officers took him out. The room felt a little lighter, but Alaric couldn't shake Magnus's warning. Isolde nodded at Alaric. The crowd whispered among themselves. Some people looked shocked, while others seemed relieved. Alaric felt a mix of emotions. Relief that Magnus was arrested, but also worry about his threat. Alaric looked at the video feed from upstairs. Sarah was watching, her eyes filled with hope and fear. She knew this wasn't over. There was a bigger danger still waiting to be revealed. After Magnus was taken away in handcuffs, the room slowly emptied. The place that was once full of noise now felt quiet. Alaric stood alone on the stage, his heart still pounding. The flashing lights of cameras turned off one by one. He felt relief, but not victory. Magnus's words echoed in his mind, "You haven't beaten the real players yet." Cassian rushed to Alaric, holding legal papers. "We need to meet with the lawyers. Magnus's arrest is just the beginning. The board will want answers." Alaric looked up at the balcony where Sarah and the children had been watching. He gave a small nod, a tiny smile forming. "I need to see them first," he said. "Then we'll deal with everything else." Security guards surrounded Alaric, but for once they weren't fighting off reporters or blocking photographers. Instead, they calmly walked with him down a hallway to a private room where Sarah waited. She was pacing back and forth, her arms crossed. Vesper Lane stood nearby, while Ryan and Elowyn sat on chairs, looking nervous. As soon as Elowyn saw Alaric, she jumped up. "Daddy!" she called, her voice shaking with relief. Ryan followed right after. Both kids ran to their father, and Alaric hugged them tightly, his heart full of love. Sarah put a hand on his back, her face showing both pride and worry. "Magnus is gone," Alaric said softly, kissing his children's heads. "He won't be able to hurt us again." Elowyn and Ryan looked up at him, searching his face. He smiled and promised, "I won't let him come near us ever again." Sarah sighed, stepping closer. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You didn't back down." Alaric held her hand. "I had to do this, for all of us." A knock at the door interrupted them. A corporate lawyer peeked in, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Vaughn, we have a problem. Some of your own board members might be part of a bigger plan. Magnus's last words might be true." Alaric felt his short moment of peace vanish. "I'll handle it," he said. He turned to Sarah. "Stay here with the kids. Vesper Lane will stay too. I'll be back soon." Sarah wanted to argue, but she just touched his hand gently. He nodded and left, following the lawyer down a long hallway to a small office. Inside, Isolde stood at a table covered in documents. "We found something big," she said in a quiet voice. "Magnus wasn't working alone. Some of our board members are linked to powerful politicians and rich business people. They might have been helping Magnus." Alaric pressed his hands on the table. "So Magnus was just a puppet?" Isolde nodded and pushed files toward him. "They all want one thing, to control this company. If they get rid of you, they can break up the company and sell it for huge profits." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Then we'll expose them. Gather all the evidence we need. I won't let them win." Isolde tapped the desk. "We have to move fast. They might call for a board vote tomorrow to push you out." Alaric stood tall. "Then I won't let them trick me. I'll fight back." Cassian was outside on the phone, giving instructions. The pressure was building, but so was Alaric's determination. He flipped through more documents, reading about hidden bank accounts and secret payments. Then he walked out and grabbed Cassian's arm. "Call an emergency board meeting," Alaric said. "Tonight. No more waiting. We show them the truth." Cassian nodded. "I'll set it up." Later that night, the board members gathered in a fancy conference room under tight security. Whispers filled the halls. With Magnus in jail, no one knew what would happen next. Alaric stood at the head of the table. He spoke firmly. "Tonight, we put an end to corruption. Some of you have betrayed this company and my family. It stops now. Cassian turned on a projector, showing proof, emails, bank records, secret memos. People gasped. Some board members got angry. Others looked scared. One young board member stood up. I second the motion. We cannot let these people stay in power. In the end, the guilty board members either resigned or were forced out. By midnight, it was over. Alaric stepped outside, leaning against the marble column. Sarah walked up to him. How did it go? She asked. They're gone, he said, exhausted. But was it worth it? Sarah held his hand. You don't have to do this alone anymore. Alaric looked at her, finally understanding. Let's go see the kids. That night, they stood on the balcony, watching the stars. You did it, Sarah whispered. Alaric smiled. No, we did it. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.